Tyler of Venn Design. Welcome to the Move Your DNA podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Katie. I'm excited to talk to you.
You are a long-term podcast sponsor. You've been on the show before, but it has been years.
It's been years.
So let's just
You
orient
still look
everyone.
pretty good.
I
The
feel
years have been
like,
kind.
yeah, like I am definitely older, definitely wiser. But I've been working on becoming taller. I noticed that I'd actually lost some of my height. And then that was
Too
motivating.
much airplanes for you. You do a lot of travel.
Not that much. I try not to travel more than once a month, which is a
Okay.
lot.
That's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot, but I try to like move around a lot once I get there. But I think it's more the computer work and the book writing. Those hours are way more than my travel hours. So that's kind of where you come in, though. I'm going to talk about my favorite product of Venn Design, and that's the air chair. I love the air chair. So how would you describe the air chair? Like, what's your cocktail party description? Like, what do you do, Venn? What do you do, Tyler? And they hand it over to you. What do you do?
Well, here I'm showing the camera a basketball that we've just come out with. And the way air chairs are made, I was inspired by stability balls, but I wanted to make real furniture out of them. And, I guess primarily there were two things I was really trying to solve. One was how durable of an item that they are. If you're really going to use a piece of furniture, it's got to withstand families. It's got to withstand years of time. You're going to feel bad if you need a replacement or throw it away too quickly. So, it needs a durability aspect, and then it's got to fit in with the atmosphere that you're creating. And I've been inspired by your philosophy for a long time, which is just that we're overly sedentary as people. And so then it's like, well, how can we live in an environment that just prompts us to use and move our body a little bit more? And so, I feel like when I was coming up with the air chair, you were one of the people who was inspiring me that like, this is a good idea. Because, I had tried to make some prototypes even years before I had originally come to market, but it was more of like an art project out of curiosity. It was like, oh, what if we could make a fabric covered exercise ball? What's that even like? And so then, some of the first versions were exactly that. But then that experience made me feel like, people don't really want to buy just like a sack of fabric. It's like, how do we transform this thing and make it a little bit better? And so some of my mindset was, well, actually, large air volumes are really chilling. So they like suck heat out of your body. And that's part of what makes them not feel like furniture. You don't feel comfortable like being in repose on them at all. So, then I was like, well, I got to cover it in some insulation. And, what is product design? It's like, in my opinion, it's like you try and find other materials or products that you can already buy. If you're trying to reinvent every single fabric or component, it's like that doesn't work at all. That's not really being very inventive. You want to be able to go buy stuff. So I went to the local fabric stores and just started seeing what was available or what's the cost of turning these things into a product and so forth. And, by this point, I'm on supply chain version number 12 or 15 or something like that. I don't know. But, and they're just kind of incremental upgrades, or, you figure out what works and what doesn't, or how you get a better price, or, almost every time I've made over the supply chain, it's resulted in a better quality product that we can make at scale, even better. So that's actually, in my opinion, don't get into product design unless you enjoy that a constant improvement process. Like in my mind, I'm so excited when we make this like one little tweak, and then it's like, oh, it's that much nicer.
Do you consider yourself an artist? Like you had said, it started as an art project. I know you to be very creative, and I feel like the stuff that you make, from the actual products to even your website, is particularly beautiful. So are you beauty inspired? Like, are you someone who's really visually inspired?
That's really kind of you. I have zero formal training. I studied physics and philosophy at university, and then I spent a number of years working in the semiconductor industry. So, like I'm probably much more of an engineer, or I'm motivated by numbers and charts and science than I'm necessarily an artist. But maybe I have like an artist's temperament, or like tapping into my creativity and then trying to combine it with my science and technology side is like where I've been able to make some of the magic happen. And just, one quick story of that is like our most popular air chair is the Earth. And that was what I wanted to make when I first set out on this project. It's like, well, what's one of the most recognizable spheres that are out there? And I was able to get these maps from NASA, and a little bit of nerd speak here for a moment, but like the maps were in a rectilinear coordinate. And then it's like, well, now I have to do a coordinate transform of this like mapping data that won't map perfectly onto a sphere. And so it'll look distorted. And then that like ruins, or it won't be as nice of an experience for the customer. So, learning how to reverse 3D to 2D geometry in artwork was like a core part of how to make air chairs look as precise and as beautiful as they do. So, yeah, I like could feel like I was part of cartography going back hundreds of years when like people were exploring the globe in the first place and stuff like that. Like it's fun for me to be connected to history in some of those ways.
This is exactly why I like to do this interview series, because to me, that is highlighting how you're not. I think a lot of times people think that people who make products are like trying to just make money, that they don't really care about the end product. And to me, this is the opposite. This is you going, I need it to be just right. And this is your particular genius, but you're expressing it in the form of dynamic furniture that everyone can, it aligns with your values, but it also aligns with your previous skill set. And then you've got something right now that intersects all of those things at the same time. And I'm excited about that. But then I want to talk about the basketball that you just showed me. So for those who are listening, these covers that you have that range in materials, I have my favorite cover of air chair that I've had for years, but you've started a sports series. How difficult, how do you make a basketball? How do you make a cover that looks exactly like a basketball or exactly like a baseball? What is that process?
Yeah, this is a really fun question because it does really get into what is product design or how do you do it in the first place. And it does connect back to the Earth, for instance. The first versions of the air chair, I had a really roughly made pattern. I didn't make it super precise. It was more that I just kind of like draped things over an exercise ball and drew them out by hand. And the challenge with making a sphere is there's lots of ways to make not a sphere, and that's obvious to people. So because it's like such a round shape that when it's not round and you're making eggs, then it ruins a kind of aesthetic to it. So I recognized pretty quickly that we needed more precise patterns. And so I did work with a pattern maker, and their job was more of like making shirts and pants patterns and these kinds of things. But we were able to work together and do some of the geometry, and that what does that mean in reality? It's like, well, you got to leave extra seam allowance so that you can actually stitch the thing together. And air chairs are made out of 5 different layers worth of material, so then like combining all those layers and what kind of sewing machine actually has the power and the pressure to hold all those materials together, so forth. So that was a bit of a process. And then once we had a precise pattern that we verified was turning into products that came out like a sphere and they didn't come out like an egg, um, then we're able to map artwork onto that. And the process that we have there is a sublimation process. So, it's almost like a big, gigantic inkjet printer, except it's as big as a room. And it prints on fabric that's, big, super wide. And then there's a big heating process that melts that ink that's been deposited on like paper onto the fabric. And so, then the actual dye is kind of like cooked into the fabric fibers themselves of sorts, so you can't scratch it off. And it has a similar resolution to an inkjet printer or whatever. So we can make these really detailed artwork on top of it. And, I mentioned a moment ago, well, what's the most recognizable sphere? And I'm like, okay, the Earth and the Moon and, some of the solar series. And then I was able to get these high resolution maps from NASA. But then it's like, okay, what are some other amazing spheres that so many people have experience with? And then from my own background, like I've loved sports since I was a little boy. And, I shot archery and lived at the Olympic Training Center and I lived with athletes of all these different sports. So, I've constantly kind of been around athletes and people who are really motivated to use and move their body. And it was shocking to me when I left some of that athletic world and was working more in the office world. I just really saw how overly sedentary that people were. And so this was always in some of my mind of like, why to make these things in the first place? And then your question was a little more directly of like, how do we make a basketball? Um, So at this point now, we have a bit of a process of taking artwork that's on an actual 3D surface and mapping it onto the 2D export that aligns with our fabric pattern. And so, now then there's a lot of highly precise 3D artwork that you could go draw in Blender or 3D Max or some of these 3D programs that you look at them all the time when you're watching movies, right? So it's like we're using that same kind of software that they use in the movie industry to show you all the computer graphics, and it's all CAD based, for instance, of like making a real 3D object. And then we're exporting out of that software to map onto the fabric patterns that we know stitched together into an air chair. And then we have the whole process. But of course, it's like this basketball, I guess we're probably on version 5 of the basketball because getting those damned black lines to line up just precisely is difficult. And, we want it to be something that someone who's a really huge basketball lover, that when guests come over, that they, oh, of course you have a basketball. And it just like, there's no suspension of disbelief or, it's like, oh, it looks all right, but it doesn't really look like a basketball. Like I want to make it more photorealistic because then it keeps you in that kind of like childlike, playful state rather than trying to think of it like a product, I guess, and I want air chairs to be this unconscious motivation to help you remind yourself, I do like playing tennis. I should go out and call up my friend to go play tennis today instead of write another email or two. So,
Well, my air chair is not sporty, but it is a pattern that I really identify with, and I like it and want to be on it just as much for the physical experience as the aesthetic of it. Both are pleasing to me. And so I am moved to move on the ball because of how beautiful it is, which for someone like me, like I'm not really aesthetically oriented. I'm trying to be more that way, but I will say that I'm captivated by how beautiful they are. They feel like luxurious furniture. They are also an exercise ball, but there's so much more than that because I have had an old exercise ball rolling around in my environment since I was, 15, 16, 17 years old, which is a lot of years, 30 plus years. But I've never been as motivated to use it all the time because it just feels good. It really does feel good.
hmm. I like how simply you said that. And also, you've sent me some kind of hilarious photos. I hope I'm not oversharing of your family doing gymnastics on air chairs. And then it's just like, well, that is what we want the kids to be doing, to be playing and using and moving their body in these ways that they just feel inspired to do. And it's like, okay, as long as they're not breaking things off the wall, it seems all right.
Well, and I think that the benefit to how beautiful they are, yes, it does not make me want to squirrel them away so that they're not used by the family. It's the opposite. It's so easy to keep them out in a aesthetically pleasing living space. And now there are these cues, and I have bigger kids now. I mean, I have literally 2 children who are larger than me at this point. Um, and trying to keep them just as active now as they were when they were younger, when they're pulled into more sedentary activities, more digital-based activities. My solution has been to create a very dynamic space for us to be in most of the time. I mean, I've done that through removing things, like I know I'm pretty well known for, like taking out a lot of the seats from my home, which has shifted. I mean, we've got more seats now than we did when they were very little. But I think now it's more about what we add, and it's lots of balance challenges, playful, sporty, fitnessy elements to our main living area, and someone is always on something. Always. Like there's never any time where people, even when the activity is fairly stationary. I think what I might have sent you is one of my kids is just so fidgety and really soothes. Like I do through a lot of movement, that reading, homework, the body is always perched on the chair and the chair is rolling around, or there's balance, someone's on the back and they're balancing, but the book is in hand. And so both things are true. That in-place activity is happening on a bed of movement, if you will. So, personal question for you: what is out of all the pieces of, you have different cushions and as well as the air chair. What do you use the most often? And I'm curious to how you use it. Like, what's your favorite go-to movement that you do on your favorite piece of equipment?
It's a great question. I didn't expect that one. We sell more large air chairs, which are, typically used for adults at a standard height desk or table. And that's what people buy the most of. So that's kind of like what they are learning about Venn for the first time. That's the first product that they're experiencing a lot.
And that's like a 65 centimeter.
That's the 65 centimeter version. Yep. And I love that one at my desk because it keeps me perched up nice and tall. But I think I have more small air chairs, and I use those small air chairs even more, I think, than the large, because when I'm at my desk, I'm often standing or sitting. And so I'm transitioning between the large and standing. But for almost all other types of activity, or if I'm going to take a phone call and I want to sit down, the small air chair is more my preference because it's a little closer to the ground. It gives me some different variety with my legs, especially the tops of my feet. I feel like I just have more stability using the tops of my feet with the small air chair. And So the small air chair is what a lot of people are sleeping on, I guess, is some of what I want to put out there. And so that the small might be my favorite, because of how much it makes me want to stretch and bend and use my body a little bit more. And I guess maybe that's because the large, I feel like, is like focus time. I'm like, now at the computer, I got to go execute. It's like maybe I have a little too much work time in that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the traditional chair shape is sort of cueing you for sitting, and when you get something, and you're a tall guy, so your small one's probably what, a 55 centimeter or smaller?
Yeah,
50 to
exactly. The size
55?
small is 55 centimeter, yeah.
Yeah. So when you're so I like this bit of psychology that you're bringing up, where so many people are like, what is the right size of vault for me? And usually what they mean for that question is for using it as a chair. But if you're thinking about it as a chair and other things, and also there's nothing wrong with a lower chair. Like all that can mean is that you're seated in something that looks more akin to a shallow squat than a 90-degree. Now maybe at your workspace you feel uncomfortable sitting at something that puts you in a squat position, but for your home office, just know that there is no perfect sitting shape. I mean, your torso is going to be upright. The only thing that's going to have to adjust would be your hips, knees, and ankles, which is great.
And there's now some desks that go really low and go both from low to high. And so I haven't really incorporated all of this into my life yet, but it definitely is the direction I'd like to go. And I do have a number of, coffee table height surfaces, and you inspire me from some of this. It's like I have some pictures of you like in your writer zone, just chilling out, typing away, and you're perched on a sitting cushion on the floor. And I can tell that like that's a comfortable position for you to be using your brain. And so I also have another space beside me where like that is one of the stations that I try to rotate through. And I guess it's like it's both a luxury, I suppose maybe you and I both enjoy, and maybe other people don't have as much of that luxury, but some of the idea is that offices need more multi-height surfaces to give people options to rotate through. Because if you don't have those options, you're not going to do them. Or if like the barrier between you changing your posture and continuing your work without too much of an interruption of flow, like you need that. So sometimes, maybe I'll like make lists or, like there's certain activities I guess I do. And I really try to make sure I do some of those activities in a couple of these different postures. Yeah.
Well, and I think that so underappreciated is how important the environment we are in is influencing us. Because I think a lot of times we're thinking that we don't have the willpower to move. Like it's a problem with us. It's a problem with our factory settings, if you will. When it's perhaps that if you look around and all you see is one shape to sit on and one way of sitting, how you would have to sort of muster constant choice to do the not easy thing. And it's just a lot of energy to have to do it all the time. So what I appreciate about what the work you're doing in the world is you are allowing people to modify their environments to make choosing movement easier, because you just have to choose it sort of once to make the modification. Yeah, and that it's kind of like a minimal shoe. Once you have minimal shoes in your closet, you don't have to put so much effort into doing the thing that allows more movement. So thank you for what you do in the world. Before we go, what's coming up? Like what are the new things?
Yeah. Well, the new one's a big one. So we've just come out with a cycling shoe here, and it is a barefoot style cycling shoe with a full carbon sole. And it's literally been in the works for 10 years. So people, please go look at our website. It's Strong Feet Athletics. We're really proud. You saw some of the early prototypes at Anya's Barefoot Shoe Expo in Chicago last May. And we are going to be at Anya's Expo this year in Denver. So would love to see people and talk to them. The first 100 pairs of the shoe have just arrived. I'll show the white color that we have too. We call it Smoke.
Options, nice.
So the first 100 pairs have already shipped out to customers, and we have 1,900 pairs on the way that arrive mid to late March. So we're really excited for people to check out the shoe. There's literally nothing like it on the market. And we think there's a big need for this. There's a number of barefoot shoe brands that are selling a lot of shoes at this point. And I meet people regularly that they've already transitioned all their regular footwear, but they're missing some like sports specific footwear. And, so part of the reason why we made a cycling shoe first is because I'm a cyclist. And I just also believe in a bicycle of doing much of the same thing that we were talking about with furniture. It's like, sometimes I do want to travel a long distance, and a bicycle is a better way for me to run my errands than doing an errand by a car if I can avoid it. It's like I'm already spending enough time in front of a computer. It's like, so I need more motion, more movement throughout my day, and I want those opportunities to do it. So for me, a bicycle unlocks one of those things that I can go run some errands and get a little more activity in my day. And we have other sports coming soon. So, cycling is our first, and we're excited for people to see what we make next.
Well, I will be at Anya's as well. So I will definitely come over. And also I just want to say thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. We really, really appreciate it. And like I said, you've been sponsoring us from the beginning. So thank you for doing that.
It's a joy to be a part of the podcast. I also really love and respect the other brands. That's some of what I think is cool about the brands that you've organized. We all kind of know each other a little bit, and I think there's a lot of respect and care for each other's products. And I think the part of the way I feel, I'm so grateful other people make some of these other products, because then I don't feel motivated. I have to go make the thing that they've already made. It's like, and that I love that there are enough options for customers now that if you do have a particular desire for a certain aesthetic or a certain sport or something, it's like there's brands who are starting to meet those needs.
Well, thanks so much for coming and chatting with me. I appreciate you.
Katie, thanks so much for having me on.